Right now, a brand new state-of-the-art memory chip manufactured in China is selling on the global spot market for 5% less than literal electronic garbage.
Yeah, it sounds completely made up, but it is entirely true.
I mean, I'm talking about used, dead components here, things ripped out of recycled, decade-old servers. A pristine, freshly fabricated piece of silicon is somehow cheaper than e-waste.
Right, which breaks every fundamental rule of manufacturing economics. Yeah.
Exactly. So today we are going to explain why that single, completely broken economic fact is currently tearing the global technology market apart.
It really is the ultimate symptom of a supply chain that has essentially developed a split personality. I mean, we're witnessing the most aggressive, rapid reallocation of manufacturing resources in the history of silicon.
And if you've, walked into an electronics store or pulled up an online retailer recently to replace a 5-year-old laptop or grab a new phone, you've probably experienced a profound level of sticker shock.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are wild.
The price tag on standard digital hardware has practically doubled, and in some cases, it's tripled compared to what you would have paid just a year ago.
Right, and unlike the 2020 to 2023 chip shortage, there is no visible external catastrophe to blame this time.
Yeah, during the pandemic, the mechanics of the shortage were obvious, right?
Exactly. I mean, shipping lanes were gridlocked, assembly lines were physically unstaffed, and you had container ships anchored off the coast of California for months at a time.
But today, the ports are wide open, the ships are moving, the factories are fully staffed. Yet, if you look at the core memory components, specifically DRAM and NAND flash, which are the foundational chips inside literally every device that processes a digital signal, prices have skyrocketed anywhere from 200 to 400%.
Yeah, the financial media has been throwing around terms like RAMageddon and the Rampacalypse.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you are listening to this, this isn't just some abstract Wall Street problem. Whether you are managing IT procurement for a massive enterprise, running a small business on a tight budget, or just trying to buy a decent tablet for your kids' schoolwork, this shortage is fundamentally rewriting the economics of the tools you rely on every day.
It really is hitting everyone at every level.
We have a massive stack of sources today. We're looking at financial reports from the major foundries, supply chain analyses, hardware engineering white papers, and our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize all of it. We are going to figure out the mechanical and economic reasons why your next computer is suddenly a luxury good.
And to really understand the mechanism of this price explosion, we have to look back at the intentional production cuts that were initiated during the market downturn of 2022 and 2023.
Right, because the semiconductor industry operates on these brutal boom and bust cycles.
Extremely brutal.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic boom, everyone bought a laptop for remote work.
Yeah, the demand was off the charts.
But then by 2022, demand totally crashed because, well, everyone was already outfitted. Nobody needed a new computer.
So the major memory manufacturers, the big three as they're called in our sources, consisting of Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and Micron Technology, they collectively control the vast majority of global output.
Right, and they suddenly found themselves sitting on mountains of unsold inventory. I mean, they were bleeding cash at a historic rate.
So what did they do?
Their response was standard corporate triage. They instituted severe coordinated production cuts. They intentionally idled their fabrication lines to drain the excess inventory and force prices to stabilize.
But wait, idling a multi-billion-dollar factory isn't like, turning off a light switch. You don't just send the workers home for the weekend.
Oh, not at all. It involves shutting down incredibly sensitive clean rooms and putting deep ultraviolet lithography machines into these complex standby states.
Right.
It is a slow, agonizing process to ramp down, and it's an equally slow process to ramp back up. And while those factories were running at absolute minimum capacity, the technology sector experienced the most violent demand shock since the invention of the internet.
Generative AI, the explosion of large language models.
Exactly. Suddenly, Silicon Valley didn't want standard microchips anymore. They demanded computing infrastructure on a planetary scale.
And that brings us to the actual hardware bottleneck of this entire crisis, high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
HBM is the absolute linchpin here. When you are training a neural network with 1 trillion parameters, the processing cores, the GPUs, are so incredibly fast that they actually spend most of their time sitting idle.
Wait, sitting idle? Why?
Because they're just waiting for data to arrive from the memory banks. Standard memory chips, like the kind of RAM installed in everyday consumer laptops, simply cannot feed data into an AI processor fast enough.
It's like trying to fill an Olympic swimming pool through a garden hose.
That is the perfect analogy, yes.
So how does HBM solve the garden hose problem? Because the sources keep mentioning it's vertically stacked, but what does that actually mean from an engineering perspective?
It means breaking the traditional rules of how we wire silicon. A normal memory chip sits flat on a circuit board, right?
Yeah.
And wires run along the edges to connect it to the processor.
Right, like a little flat city with highways around the outside.
Exactly. But with high bandwidth memory, they take multiple ultra-thin memory chips and stack them on top of each other, sometimes up to 12 or 16 layers high.
Like a skyscraper.
Yes, but you can't just wire the edges of a skyscraper when you need that much data. You have to drill microscopic holes straight down through the entire stack of silicon,
Wait, you're drilling through the chip itself?
literally through the silicon. They're called through-silicon vias, or TSVs. Imagine punching thousands of microscopic elevator shafts straight through a skyscraper and filling those shafts with copper. This allows electrical signals to travel vertically, creating thousands of ultra-short, massive bandwidth data highways directly to the processor. It turns the garden hose into a massive water main.
The engineering is brilliant, but looking at the scale of demand in our sources, it's also clearly the catalyst for our shortage. Let's look at OpenAI. They are driving an AI infrastructure build-out called the Stargate project.
Yeah, Stargate is just massive.
According to the supply chain leaks we have here, OpenAI signed letters of intent with Samsung and SK Hynix to secure HBM just for this specific project. And the volume they are demanding is projected to consume up to 40% of the entire global output of DRAM.
Let that sink in. One single corporate initiative is poised to absorb nearly half of the world's functional working memory. The contracts stipulate the delivery of roughly 900,000 wafers per month.
And here's the detail that really illustrates the absolute panic in the market. The sources note this deal involves supplying those wafers undiced.
Which is extremely unusual.
Right. Normally, a foundry like TSMC or Samsung bakes a giant 12-inch silicon wafer, slices it up into hundreds of individual chips, puts them in protective plastic packaging, and ships them out.
Yeah, that's the standard flow.
But Stargate is demanding the silicon so fast, and the advanced packaging bottlenecks are so tight, they are just ordering the uncut, raw wafers.
It bypasses the traditional supply chain entirely. They're basically handing the raw wafers off to specialized third-party advanced packaging facilities just to shave weeks off the deployment schedule.
But this is where the business logic stops making sense to me. If I am the CEO of Samsung or Micron and OpenAI wants 900,000 wafers of HBM, while Dell and Apple still need millions of wafers of standard DDR5 RAM for consumer laptops, why don't I just build more factories and sell to everyone?
That's the logical question, yeah.
It feels like the world's farmland is suddenly exclusively growing truffles for five-star restaurants, leaving absolutely no soil left for the wheat that feeds everyone else. Why not just buy more farmland and make both?
The problem is that the farmland in this scenario is a semiconductor fabrication plant, a fab. You cannot simply buy one.
They're a bit pricey, I assume.
A modern fab costs between $15 and $25 billion to construct.
Billion with a B.
With a B. It requires amounts of water and electricity comparable to a small city and takes a minimum of 3 to 5 years to build. And that is assuming you can even source the lithography machines, which are heavily backordered.
Right.
But your analogy actually touches on the core physical problem. HBM physically consumes more silicon real estate per bit than standard memory.
Explain the math on that. If a 12-inch wafer yields, say, 500 standard laptop memory chips, why doesn't it yield 500 HBM chips?
Because of those vertical connections, the TSVs, and the wider physical interfaces required to push that much data, plus the manufacturing defect rate is incredibly unforgiving.
Or it's stacked.
Exactly. When you stack 12 delicate layers of silicon, if even one layer has a microscopic flaw, you have to throw the entire stack in the garbage.
Oh, that hurts.
The yield rates are significantly lower. So to produce a set amount of functional HBM, you have to feed vastly more raw wafers into the machine.
The sources show Samsung recently dedicated 60,000 wafers a month exclusively to their new HBM4 production line.
Which means 60,000 wafers have been physically erased from the consumer supply chain. The capacity for standard laptop RAM, the wheat in your analogy, is violently contracting because every available square inch of silicon real estate is being reallocated to the highly profitable AI truffles.
And this cannibalization is bleeding into long-term storage too, right? NAND flash, the chips inside your solid-state drives, saw contract prices for raw wafers jump by more than 60% month over month late last year.
That kind of hypervolatility breaks procurement models completely. The foundries are aggressively retiring their older manufacturing nodes to clear floor space for high-margin enterprise SSDs designed for AI servers.
The sources highlight that 512 gigabyte TLC chips took the steepest hit. Why TLC specifically?
So TLC stands for triple-level cell. It's a technology that allows you to store 3 bits of data in a single microscopic memory cell.
Okay.
It is the workhorse of consumer electronics. It's what gives your phone 512 gigabytes of storage without costing $1,000. But stacking layers of TLC memory requires a process called plasma-enhanced chemical vapor deposition, or PCVD.
That sounds intense.
You are essentially using plasma to lay down films of chemicals, atom by atom. The machines that do this are currently being cannibalized or retasked for enterprise server storage, starving the TLC consumer market.
And that structural shift is causing cascading bottlenecks and resources I didn't even know existed. Reading through these industry analyses, you really realize how fragile the whole ecosystem is. Take glass cloth, for instance.
Ah, the substrate material.
Right. It's a high-performance glass fiber used inside printed circuit boards. AI processors generate immense heat and push data at such extreme frequencies that standard fiberglass boards suffer from signal degradation.
What engineers call insertion loss.
Right, the electrical signal literally gets fuzzy. To fix that, you need a specialized glass cloth with a very low dielectric constant. And it turns out, a single Japanese company, Nito Buseki, holds an overwhelming near-total monopoly on manufacturing this specific grade of fiberglass.
And they're completely tapped out. When you have Apple, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and AMD all launching bidding wars over specialized fiberglass, it paralyzes the downstream manufacturers who suddenly can't source the materials to build standard motherboards.
We're also seeing Western Digital, one of the primary manufacturers of mechanical hard drives, reporting that their entire enterprise hard disk supply is booked out past February 2026.
Right, because even with solid-state drives taking over, AI data centers still require exabytes of cold storage, massive arrays of spinning magnetic disks to archive the raw data they scrape from the internet.
Yeah.
The AI hyperscalers basically bought the entire global supply.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture,
A 2024 McKinsey analysis modeled the trajectory of global data center power and spatial capacity. They project that global demand for AI-ready infrastructure will grow by 33% annually through the rest of the decade.
33% a year.
Every year. Their conclusion is that AI workloads will consume roughly 70% of total global data center capacity by 2030.
7 out of every 10 servers on Earth dedicated entirely to AI.
It confirms this is not a temporary supply chain glitch. This is a permanent paradigm shift. The semiconductor industry has formally changed its primary target demographic. The most important customer is no longer the everyday consumer. It is the hyperscale AI corporation.
If 40% of the world's memory output is going to one OpenAI project and 70% of data center capacity is pivoting to AI, the arithmetic gets terrifying for companies trying to build standard consumer hardware. The corporate panic in these sources is just palpable.
The original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs like Dell, HP, Lenovo, are the ones caught in the vice grip right now. They operate on notoriously razor-thin profit margins, often hovering around 3 to 5% per PC sold.
Dell's chief operating officer, Jeff Clark, did an analyst call late last year where he sounded the alarm. He called the component cost escalation unprecedented.
And he wasn't just talking about a slight dip in margins.
No, he was warning about a structural inability to secure DRAM, hard drives, and NAND flash at viable prices.
Wall Street understood the subtext immediately. Morgan Stanley downgraded Dell's stock from overweight to underweight. Their rationale was that Dell's heavy exposure to these surging server and PC memory costs was going to obliterate their profitability.
I mean, you cannot maintain a 4% margin when the cost of the raw materials inside your product doubles in a span of 90 days.
Exactly.
HP provided the exact math on this during their Q1 2026 earnings call. Historically, the memory chips, the RAM, and the SSD made up about 15 to 18% of the total cost of materials to build an HP computer.
Which is pretty standard.
But in one single quarter, that figure jumped to 35%. More than a third of the budget to build a laptop is now consumed just by the memory. HP had to issue forward-looking warnings to investors expecting double-digit percentage declines in revenue.
And this level of component hostility is even breaching companies that are usually immune to market fluctuations through sheer purchasing power.
Apple is the textbook example here. Tim Cook's entire reputation was built on supply chain mastery.
Right, Apple usually wields so much cash they can lock in component pricing years in advance, essentially forcing suppliers to absorb the volatility.
An initial report suggested Apple was fully shielded through early 2026. But the armor cracked. On June 25, 2026, Apple did something they almost never do outside of a product refresh cycle. They announced immediate, across-the-board price hikes.
iPads, MacBooks, HomePods, even the Vision Pro.
The financial markets reacted violently. Apple shares dropped more than 6% on the announcement, marking their worst single day of trading since the macroeconomic crash in April 2025.
When the most cash-rich technology company on the planet is forced to instantly pass component costs onto the consumer, it signals that the baseline economics of manufacturing have broken down completely.
Lenovo's CFO even admitted they were operating in panic mode, hoarding component inventory at 50% above normal levels. They are burning cash just to secure silicon before it gets even more expensive.
This is just-in-time manufacturing completely collapsing into hoarding behavior.
We are even seeing it at the retail level. In Tokyo's Akihabara district, physical electronics stores are putting limits on how many sticks of RAM a single person can buy.
It really mirrors the toilet paper hoarding of the pandemic, but applied to high-speed DDR5 memory modules.
But what does this actually mean for you, the listener? We are essentially looking at the death of budget technology.
The research firm Gartner ran the projections on these baseline component costs. Their conclusion is that manufacturing an entry-level laptop, specifically devices priced under the $500 threshold, will become mathematically unviable.
Wow.
Yeah, they expect the sub-$500 PC market to effectively disappear by 2028.
The societal impact of that is massive. The $400 laptop is the backbone of the public education system. It's what cash-strapped college students rely on. It's what mom-and-pop businesses buy for their reception desks.
Absolutely.
If the floor for a functional computer rises to $800 or $1,000, you are pricing a massive demographic out of the digital economy. Gartner also notes average smartphone prices are expected to jump 14% to a record $523.
When the foundational building blocks of computation become premium, scarce commodities, the devices built from them inevitably transition into luxury goods.
Not every company is just passing the cost along, though.
Yeah.
The strategic counter tactics in these reports are fascinating, especially in the gaming sector.
Right.
Sony made waves when they dropped the price of the PlayStation 5 by $100 for Black Friday 2025.
They executed a massive loss leader strategy under extreme duress.
Right. They looked at the skyrocketing cost of GDDR6 memory, calculated that they were losing money on every single console sold at the discounted price, and did it anyway.
Because Sony isn't just selling hardware. They were selling a closed ecosystem.
Exactly. If a consumer doesn't buy the console because the hardware is too expensive, they don't buy the $70 games, they don't subscribe to PlayStation Plus, they don't rent movies on the platform, the hardware is just the toll booth. They will eat a massive loss on the toll booth to get you onto the highway.
Now, compare that to Valve's hardware strategy. Valve operates the Steam platform, which is the dominant PC gaming marketplace.
Valve was slated to release their second-generation Steam Machine hardware in early 2026, but the memory shortage completely derailed their timeline.
When they finally managed to secure the components and launch in June, they completely abandoned their mainstream pricing goals. The console launched at $1,049.
Market analysts pointed out that this price point was 75% higher than a PlayStation 5 at the time.
Right. Valve doesn't have the scale to absorb hundreds of millions of dollars in hardware losses like Sony, so they had to pass the true cost of the memory directly to the user.
It transformed what was supposed to be a mainstream living room device into an ultra-niche, premium luxury item.
And according to the engineering leaks, hardware companies are frantically trying to redesign their logic boards to function on less memory just to keep prices down.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What if the fix for a physical hardware shortage is actually a software breakthrough?
Ah, the TurboQuant announcement?
Yes. On March 24th, 2026, Google unveiled a technology called TurboQuant. It is a highly specialized memory compression architecture designed exclusively for running large language models and vector databases.
It's fascinating tech.
Google claimed and provided benchmarks to prove that TurboQuant achieves a 6 times lower memory consumption footprint in local AI models, while simultaneously delivering an 8-fold performance increase on NVIDIA H100 accelerators.
And to appreciate how disruptive that is, you have to look at the mechanics of neural network quantization. AI models usually operate using complex floating point numbers requiring massive amounts of memory bandwidth to calculate.
Okay.
Quantization shrinks those numbers into much smaller, lower precision integers, so move from a 16-bit number down to a 4-bit integer, for example.
But usually when you shrink the precision, the AI gets stupid, right? It hallucinates more.
Precisely. The challenge is squishing the data without losing the intelligence. Google's TurboQuant utilizes a novel form of vector clustering that allows the model to compress its memory footprint by 600%, with virtually zero loss in reasoning capabilities.
That is incredible.
Furthermore, it is a drop-in enhancement, meaning software developers can integrate it into their existing code bases instantly without rebuilding their models from scratch.
So Google announces they can run state-of-the-art AI on a fraction of the physical hardware. You would think the tech sector would celebrate.
You would think.
But the stock market's reaction was incredibly violent in the opposite direction.
The memory sector just went into freefall.
Micron, Western Digital, Seagate, SanDisk, every major data storage and memory equity plunged the moment TurboQuant was announced.
It reveals the deep psychological fragility of the current market valuation. The astronomical share prices of these memory foundries are entirely predicated on the assumption that AI's appetite for raw physical silicon is infinite.
Right.
The moment a software innovation proved that you could shrink that appetite by a factor of 6, the projected 10-year demand curve instantly collapsed. The justification for charging a 400% premium evaporated in an afternoon.
It is a high-stakes game of chicken between physical hardware constraints and software optimization algorithms. But as chaotic as the Silicon Valley dynamics are, the geopolitical reality is even heavier.
Oh, absolutely. We had to transition into the international trade context here. The facts regarding international sanctions, tariffs, and state-subsidized manufacturing are central to why the market is behaving this way.
And just to be completely clear for you listening, we are reporting these developments based purely on supply chain data and global trade records. We are definitely not endorsing the political or economic policies of any nation involved here. We're just looking at the facts on the ground.
Exactly. And the objective reality is that the free market is currently heavily warped. In a normal capitalist vacuum, if the price of a commodity like memory jumps by 400%, new competitors enter the market, build new factories, flood the zone with supply, and prices stabilize.
But the semiconductor space is choked by geopolitical tension, primarily export controls initiated by the United States aimed at curbing China's access to advanced technology.
The U.S. strategy has relied on heavily restricting the export of leading-edge semiconductor manufacturing equipment, specifically EUV lithography machines, to Chinese foundries.
And the fear of secondary sanctions was so intense that back in 2025, South Korean giants like Samsung and SK Hynix preemptively halted the sale of even their older, legacy, non-restricted manufacturing equipment to Chinese buyers.
Yeah, they simply did not want to risk triggering a regulatory backlash from Washington.
But cutting off a technologically advanced nation from Western equipment rarely stops their development, does it?
No, it simply forces them to build their own parallel ecosystem.
It served as the ultimate catalyst. The sources show China has aggressively subsidized a fully independent domestic supply chain, and the scale of what they are building is staggering. Let's look at YMTC, Yangtze Memory Technologies Corp.
They are China's national champion for NAND flash memory.
Right. In December 2022, they were placed on the U.S. Commerce Department's entity list, cutting them off from American suppliers.
And by conventional logic, being cut off from applied materials and Lam research should have crippled their fabrication capabilities.
Instead, YMTC is currently constructing 2 colossal new fabs in Wuhan, right next to a Phase 3 plant that is already receiving equipment. Each of these new facilities is designed for an output of 100,000 wafers per month.
That is massive.
When fully operational alongside their legacy fabs, YMTC is targeting a total manufacturing capacity of 500,000 wafers per month.
That volume would potentially make YMTC the largest single NAND wafer producer on the planet.
But the truly historic shift isn't the size of the buildings, it's what is inside them. Historically, Chinese semiconductor fabs had to import the vast majority of their precision tools.
Yeah, only 15 to 30% of the machinery inside a Chinese fab was domestically produced.
But the supply chain audits for YMTC's new Phase 3 facility reveal that over 50% of the manufacturing equipment is sourced entirely from domestic Chinese suppliers.
Crossing that 50% localization threshold is a monumental engineering achievement for China's domestic toolmakers.
The sources specifically highlight companies like AMS and NARA. Let's talk about the mechanics of what these tools do. AME specializes in etching equipment.
Right, and etching accounts for roughly a quarter of a fab's entire capital expenditure. When you are building 3D memory, you are stacking hundreds of microscopic layers of silicon and insulating materials.
Okay, we talked about stacking earlier.
An etching machine uses plasma to carve perfectly straight, infinitesimally small trenches down through those layers. If the trench deviates by even a few nanometers, the chip shorts out. AMEC has developed etching tools capable of extreme aspect ratios, matching Western capabilities.
And then Nora provides deposition and cleaning tools. And another firm, Piotech, saw their share of PECVD equipment, that's the chemical vapor deposition we mentioned earlier, double from 15% to 30% inside YMTC's supply lines.
The U.S. sanctions basically functioned as a multi-billion-dollar forced stimulus package for these domestic engineering firms.
And YMTC isn't just brute forcing the manufacturing process. They are fundamentally innovating on the architectural design to bypass the limitations of the tools they do have. This is evident in their X-Stacking 4.0 architecture.
The engineering behind X-stacking is fascinating.
Explain how it solves the physical limits of a memory wafer.
Well, traditional NAND memory is built monolithically. The actual memory cells that store the data and the logic circuits that read and write that data are fabricated side by side on the exact same silicon wafer.
Sounds efficient.
It is, but the problem is that memory cells require extremely high heat to bake into the silicon, which can actually damage the delicate logic circuits. You have to compromise the performance of both to let them survive on the same wafer.
So YMTC just decided to build them separately?
Exactly. The X-stacking approach involves fabricating the logic circuits on one wafer and the high-density memory array on a completely separate wafer. They process them in different machines, optimizing the heat profiles for each.
Oh, that makes sense.
Then they use a process called hybrid bonding to perfectly align the two wafers and fuse them together at a microscopic level.
It's like manufacturing the engine of a car in one factory, the chassis in another, and then perfectly dropping them together at the end of the line.
And it yields massive array efficiency and bit density. X-Stacking 4.0 is currently running at 270 layers of memory.
Wow.
Well, that is numerically slightly behind SK Hynix at 321 layers or Samsung at 286 layers. The dual wafer architecture means the actual data throughput and physical density are highly competitive on the global stage.
And we are seeing the same relentless push on the DRAM side, too. CXMT, Changshan Memory Technologies, is rapidly accelerating their RAM development. They are transitioning their DDR5 products from a 17-nanometer node down to a 60-nanometer process, and they are preparing a 15-nanometer node for mass production in late 2026.
Achieving 15-nanometer DRAM without access to extreme ultraviolet or EUV lithography is incredibly difficult.
Right, because EUV machines from ASML in the Netherlands use wavelengths of light so small they operate in a vacuum, allowing them to draw inconceivably small transistors. But they are heavily sanctioned, so how is CXMT shrinking their chips without them?
Through aggressive deep ultraviolet, or DUV, multi-patterning, they are taking older legal immersion lithography machines and running the silicon through them multiple times, overlapping the patterns to trick the light into carving smaller features.
That sounds tedious.
It takes longer and increases the chance of defects, absolutely, but they are succeeding. Micron used similar DUV techniques to reach 13-nanometer nodes before finally adopting EUV, so the engineering pathway is proven.
Then we have Huawei, the primary target of Western tech sanctions for the better part of a decade. The reports indicate Huawei isn't just designing chips, they are partnering with the Chinese government and a local memory maker called Suisher to physically build their own 12-inch memory fabrication plant.
They're targeting an initial capacity of 140,000 wafers per month of 28-nanometer DRAM.
They are pulling in serious veteran talent, too. They recruited a former TSMC factory director as CEO and an ex-Elpida executive as their chief strategist. They are building an executive team that knows exactly how to scale a silicon fab from the ground up.
For a company like Huawei, navigating a hostile global supply chain is an existential threat. Building an internal, heavily subsidized memory fab guarantees they will never be starved of basic compute components again.
Which brings us to the collision course between these two massive market forces. On one side, the Korean giants, Samsung and SK Hynix, are pivoting all their cleanroom space away from standard consumer RAM to chase the trillion-dollar AI HBM market. On the other side, Chinese fabs are expanding at an unprecedented scale. The result is a massive vacuum in the market for legacy memory, standard DDR4 RAM, and the Chinese manufacturers are rushing in to claim it. The Taiwanese supply chain has dubbed this phenomenon the bloody river of DDR4.
The term perfectly captures the brutality of the price war. The Chinese DRAM makers have ramped up their massive new fabs so quickly that they are drastically oversupplying their own domestic market. To keep the factories running, they must export the excess.
And the prices they are offering defy all conventional business logic. According to the spot market trackers, standard international DDR4 8 gigabit chips were trading at roughly $1.13. Chinese fabs are quoting the exact same specification between 75 cents and $1.
That is a 50% discount.
Because they are backed by massive state subsidies aimed at achieving global market penetration, these foundries are entirely insulated from standard profit and loss pressures. They can intentionally operate at a deep financial loss indefinitely to capture global market share and drive competitors out of the legacy tiers.
The result is the statistic we started the show with. A brand new, zero-hour Chinese DDR4 chip is currently selling for 5% less than a used recycled chip salvaged from electronic waste.
You cannot compete with a brand new product that is priced lower than literal garbage.
It creates a fatal economic squeeze for mid-tier manufacturers in Taiwan and South Korea who rely on the steady revenue of legacy DDR4 to fund their research into advanced nodes.
And to dodge the geopolitical red flags, the supply chain data shows these Chinese firms are utilizing incredibly complex transshipment routes to sell these cheap chips globally, particularly into the booming Indian electronics market.
Direct trade between China and India is fraught with regulatory hurdles due to border tensions.
So they launder the silicon. The sources outline how Chinese foundries sell the raw chips at rock-bottom prices to shell companies or willing hardware brands in Taiwan. The Taiwanese companies integrate the chips onto circuit boards, relabel the packaging, and export them into India as Taiwanese products. They use the free trade zones of Taiwan to legally scrub the origin of the silicon.
The global electronics market is like water. It will always find the path of least resistance through the cracks of international trade law.
What's fascinating here is, well, we shouldn't assume China is only interested in dominating the cheap legacy chip market. The data proves they are heavily investing in the bleeding edge of AI hardware as well.
A comprehensive study led by Hanyang University analyzed global research output regarding high-bandwidth memory. The findings were a stark wake-up call for the established players.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
In 2023, Chinese academic and corporate institutions published 169 peer-reviewed research papers specifically focused on advancing HBM architecture.
169 papers. And South Korea, the country that currently commands over 90% of the global HBM market share, how many did they publish?
South Korean institutions published only 67 papers. The United States published 114.
China is publishing 2.5 times more foundational, peer-reviewed engineering research on high-bandwidth memory than the country that currently holds an absolute monopoly on the technology.
It's a massive shift in momentum.
The dominance South Korea enjoys today is built on the research they did in the early 2000s. China is planting the seeds for the 2030s right now. The government's stated goal is 70% semiconductor self-sufficiency by 2025. Chinese packaging firms like Tongfu Microelectronics are already actively ramping up advanced 2.5D packaging techniques to supply HBM2 to domestic AI developers like Huawei.
The technological moat that Western and allied nations assumed would take decades for China to cross is evaporating in a matter of years.
With the market in the state of absolute chaos, 400% price hikes, desperate OEMs, massive geopolitical supply dumping, it was only a matter of time before the legal system got involved.
Unavoidable, really.
If the big three memory giants are abandoning the consumer market for AI contracts, the question becomes, did they coordinate that abandonment illegally?
That is the core premise of a massive antitrust class action lawsuit recently filed against Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron in U.S. federal court.
The plaintiffs are alleging that the big three used the generative AI boom as a convenient smokescreen to engage in deliberate price fixing. The legal claim is that they didn't just passively respond to market forces, they actively communicated and colluded to artificially starve the consumer DRAM and legacy DDR3 markets, intentionally restricting supply to inflate the baseline commodity pricing.
Now, proving illegal collusion in a market controlled by a triopoly is notoriously difficult. This is a market structure known as conscious parallelism, where three giant companies can observe each other's production cuts and match them without ever actually speaking to each other in a smoke-filled room.
The founders will argue in court that they simply shifted their limited wafer capacity to meet the most profitable demand, which is the definition of capitalism.
Right.
But the plaintiffs are pointing to historical precedent. In the early 2000s, Samsung, Hynix, and Infineon all pleaded guilty to a massive Department of Justice investigation for organizing a global conspiracy to fix DRAM prices. Executives literally went to federal prison. The plaintiffs are arguing that the leopard hasn't changed its spots.
The legal discovery process will take years, but the real-world business fatalities are happening right now. We discussed how megacorporations like Dell and Apple are suffering, but the situation is utterly lethal for mid-sized and independent electronics companies.
Our sources describe a procurement market that has devolved into hourly pricing. Memory prices on the spot market are fluctuating so violently that a supplier quote is only legally binding for 60 minutes.
That's just insane.
If you're a mid-tier manufacturer trying to build a new router or a smart home device, how do you secure a line of credit or budget a production run when your primary component cost changes every hour?
It creates a state of complete paralysis. Furthermore, the gatekeepers of the supply chain are imposing draconian payment terms. Thiessen, a massive manufacturer of the controller chips that run SSDs, reported that certain silicon foundries are now demanding up to 3 years of cash payment up front just to secure a spot on the manufacturing line for NAND flash.
3 years of cash up front. A startup building a new consumer tech gadget doesn't have tens of millions in liquid capital sitting in a checking account.
Not at all.
That demand alone is an extinction-level event for independent hardware companies. It is a brutal Darwinian culling where only the most heavily capitalized giants survive.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question regarding this crisis. When does the market stabilize?
When can the average consumer buy a reasonably priced laptop again? The deeply unsettling part of this research is that the titans of the industry offer wildly contradictory timelines.
If you look at the projections from Micron's CEO, Sanjay Mehrotra, from mid-2026, he explicitly stated that the severe supply constraints will persist entirely through 2027. He does not expect the supply-demand balance to even begin normalizing until 2028.
So 2 more full years of bleeding. But then you listen to Chae Tae-won, the chairman of SK Group, the conglomerate that owns SK Hynix. He estimates the HBM-driven memory shortage will persist until 2030.
His model is based on the multi-year architectural blueprints for hyperscale data centers. He calculates that the physical construction of new fabs cannot outpace the exponential growth curve of AI parameter sizes for the remainder of the decade.
But then, buried in the sources, you find a completely divergent, highly credible opinion. Ki-hyun Kim, the former head of Samsung's entire semiconductor division, went on the record predicting that this entire price spike could completely crash within a single year. And his reasoning goes right back to the geopolitics we talked about. China.
He is testing the elasticity of the market. He believes that the sheer volume of the DDR4 dumping blitz initiated by manufacturers like Changsun Memory is too massive for the global market to absorb.
He argues that you can't have a hyper-premium AI memory market floating above a flooded, worthless legacy memory market indefinitely. Eventually, that tidal wave of incredibly cheap Chinese silicon will drag the entire baseline commodity price back down, crushing the 400% price hikes and breaking the Western foundries' profit models.
It is a profound debate over whether the global technology market is fundamentally unified or if it has permanently split into 2 completely isolated ecosystems.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's synthesize the chaos. Whether you are an everyday consumer delaying a PC upgrade, a gamer staring at a $1,000 console, or an enterprise IT manager trying to balance a decimated hardware budget, you are trapped in the middle of a historic geopolitical and technological tug-of-war.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
On one side, you have Silicon Valley's insatiable, trillion-dollar ambition to build artificial general intelligence, an endeavor that is indiscriminately devouring the world's premium silicon and driving consumer prices into the stratosphere. On the other side, you have China's heavily subsidized, relentless production engine, desperate to achieve total silicon self-sufficiency and fully willing to flood the globe with cheap legacy memory to break the Western monopoly. And right in the crush zone of those 2 tectonic plates is your wallet.
It is vital to recognize your own role in this realignment, too. Every time you log onto a platform to generate a synthetic image, ask an LLM to write code, or summarize a PDF, you are actively utilizing the exact infrastructure that is cannibalizing the supply chain. The remarkable convenience of cloud-based artificial intelligence is being directly subsidized by the surging cost of your baseline consumer hardware.
That brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over that builds on everything we've unpacked today. We are watching the dominant Western manufacturers, Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron sprint toward the premium, high-margin AI chips, effectively abandoning the budget consumer tiers. Meanwhile, China is producing a massive, impossibly cheap supply of legacy hardware while rapidly closing the gap on advanced AI research.
It's a huge divergence.
Given this trajectory, could we be looking at a near future where the global technology ecosystem physically and completely bifurcates? Are we heading toward a reality where Western consumers are priced out of basic entry-level tech, forced into a subscription model to lease premium AI-integrated luxury devices, while the global South and developing markets run their entire economies on a hyper-affordable, entirely sanctioned, parallel Chinese silicon ecosystem?
It really makes you wonder.
Will the digital divide of the 2030s no longer be defined by who has access to the internet, but by which geopolitical superpower manufactured the physical motherboard inside your machine? It's a massive, unsettling question, and it's one that the next few years of this RAMageddon will undoubtedly answer. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface of the headlines, and we will see you next time.